where the Netlify founder had a debate with the WordPress founder.
Oh, really?
I instigated that. I instigated that on Twitter. I was like tagging them both. I was, yes, come on, like we gotta have a discussion about this. And
Oh,
like I
really?
think like again, it's sort of like a right tool for the job.
Adam, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good, 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 doing good. So, first off, we're going to talk about microservices and, headless, Molten, all sorts of stuff that should be super interesting. But to get things started, how's everything going, in the time of COVID? You managing to stay sane?
Um,
If so,
yeah,
how, you know?
I guess surprisingly well. I guess came back from the US like a week before lockdown here in the UK, so like kind of just snuck in there. But obviously with like e-commerce space kind of booming in the midst of all the turmoil,
Yeah,
I guess it's kind of a good thing for sort of our industry at least. I'm
yeah,
sort of booked out till the end of the year with like
yeah, yeah,
clients and stuff, so
yeah. That's
it's
cool.
been okay.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think the our industry is doing well, obviously. So it's just kind of a matter of staying sane personally and, like
Mm.
not, not being too what city are you in the UK?
So I am in a small village, like
Oh,
about half an
really?
hour from Newcastle. So it's called Rothbury.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
it's like in the countryside. So
Oh, that's
it's
awesome.
very isolated, like given the
Gotcha.
situation. We've had like a handful of cases in the village, and
Yeah.
I mean that's a lot out of the thousands, but it's not
Yeah.
like anything as bad as the
Gotcha.
cities.
Right.
Um,
So you're probably getting outside a lot and or going
yeah,
for
there's
walks
like
or
sheep
whatever.
in the field behind the house, and
Nice. I love it.
really scenic place. People come here for like holidays and like vacations and things.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, we back up to a ranch, and so there's cows that will graze there from time to time, and our kids get all excited, and they'll run out there and look at the cows and stuff. And it's like,
My 1 year old is like loves like barring at the sheep, like yelling
oh
at the top
yeah,
of his voice.
yeah.
So
How did you decide to move there? Is it like
so
remote work kind of thing?
my wife grew up here, so her mum lives here still. So that's where we currently are located as we wait to buy a house. Like
Gotcha.
the entire like housing market is tipped upside down. Everyone moving out of the cities, like all their properties are pretty
Right.
much bought up. So we're kind of waiting probably until about April to like buy somewhere.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I don't know what's going on with the housing market. It's so strange. Like we're in the suburbs and prices have gone. I think they've stayed the same a little bit, or like I have a buddy that said he sold his house like that.
Yeah,
Because people are,
things go like within like 1 or 2 days. We got to see one and then
yeah,
it's gone. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of insane.
yeah. So, and it seems like overall the housing market really hasn't gone down anywhere near as much as it should, based on how heavily the economy's been impacted and stuff. But it's weird. It doesn't, it's like kind of doesn't make any
I guess it
sense.
might depend on sort of like yeah, like the geographic like locations.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I feel like cities maybe hit a little bit harder, but like at least in the rural areas where people can
yeah,
work remotely, and so people are starting to move out of the cities and realizing they don't need to be
yeah,
making those intercity commutes.
yeah. How long have you been working remotely?
Um, I guess since like April, I guess March, April, yeah.
Oh,
Well, as
okay.
soon as I
So
kind of
not
got
too
back
long.
from Boston, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the Boston thing, this brings us into the Molten acquisition. Was that what
Mhm.
that trip was for? So huge
Yeah, exactly.
congrats. You built.
I don't know whether we should like go like backwards in time or whether we should like start from the beginning and like
Yeah, I like to jump around, but
or
feel
just jump
free to
around.
feel free to start, to take it any direction you want. But I saw that, you built Molten for about 7 years and it
Mhm.
got acquired recently by Elastic Path. So huge congrats on that. That's
Thank
exciting.
you.
And so, actually, first off, I was curious about the name Molten because it's such a cool name. But I was like, how does that relate to commerce or headless commerce? I want to know the origin story there.
So I used to work at an agency as a developer like 8 years ago, I guess. We're working on I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Pyro CMS. We built Fire Sale, which was like the
Ah,
go-to
that
e-commerce
sounds
plugin.
somewhat
Um,
familiar.
Yeah, we sort of like we would work with like Magento and Shopify and stuff, and we decided to sort of build a plugin for the CMS that we were using at the time,
Okay.
and then came across all the sort of the same problems as Magento, like building an e-commerce. Like even though it was a plugin, like the same sort of issues as a platform in terms of
Right.
like maintenance and updates, that kind of thing. So we thought, why not the same thing, like but as APIs, like before like headless was really a thing, and so that continue that sort of fire theme from sort of fire sale to Molten, and then also from the sense of sort of what we sort of imagined the e-commerce APIs sort of feeling like in terms
Mm.
of like malleable like lava, we could sort of mold it to whatever your requirements sort of were. So yeah, cool name.
Huh.
It took us a while to get the .com, but that's a separate
Well, you
story. But
can't. Okay, so but you can't mold lava. Like you can like how
it's
does
like squidgy, like malleable a little bit. You can like put it into a shape,
gotcha.
and then
Gotcha.
it'll set, and it's like rock hard, and it's like really
Gotcha.
robust
Okay.
for that
That
purpose.
okay, I like okay, so I would think of it more as like less of lava and more of like molten metal, like if you're a
Oh
blacksmith
yeah,
and
that's a, yeah.
you bring it into that mold. Whereas like lava volcanoes is like totally uncontrolled. Things are going every which
Mm.
way. That is that's really
I mean,
cool.
that's also like that's a good analogy for a startup anyway. So
Yeah, yeah. It works on many different levels. The analogy works on lots of levels. That's cool. I like that. So how did you get so far ahead of the curve on Headless?
um, yeah, we when Molten was founded in 2013, Headless was like not even in the, I guess
It's
the
like you were definitely into Headless before it was cool, right?
before we before it was even like called Headless. Yeah, it was. We were looking at like Stripe and Twilio at the time, and we thought like, wouldn't it be cool for an e-commerce API, like turning all the ecom platform and making it accessible? Obviously, like JavaScript frameworks and things didn't really exist back then. You had like jQuery and stuff. There wasn't any
Right,
frameworks, so to speak. Um, but yeah, we thought wouldn't it be great like to be able to just to unshackle that front end from the back end, and then you could sort of we would maintain the back end and you could do what you want on the front end, and that
yeah,
would sort of take away a lot of the maintenance headaches,
right,
whilst at the same time not getting sort of as locked into Shopify templates, and so you could just bring your own tool belt basically.
right.
Um, and like surprisingly, we went through like an accelerator like straight off the back of sort of founding the company called Ignite 100, like based
Mhm.
in Newcastle. And then I remember that accelerator. We were just building product. Like we were just building. Like you can imagine three guys from Newcastle, Jamie, Chris, and I, just building like features, like an endless list of features. But trying to get the product cart checkout order sort of critical path sort
Yeah,
of nailed
yeah,
first. So
yeah.
that was
And are you
it was like stuck together with like PHP like in duct
right,
tape.
right? And are you a developer yourself?
I used to be. I
Okay,
understand all the concepts and all the sort of the abstract thoughts behind it, so I haven't stayed up to date with like the
gotcha.
latest like Jamstack framework. I understand what they are and I've like dabbled.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I kind of I guess I was the most commercially minded of the three founders, all of us developers. So I kind of
right,
went into more of like sales and marketing side.
right,
Our sort of thesis was very much I guess a developer go to market. So like scratch your own itch to the business. On
right.
paper, it all makes sense for an agency to kind of just pick up a set of APIs and then just sort of build like whatever the client asks for. We found like trying to like mold like Magento or Shopify to the client's requirements was uh, like like hitting our head against the desk sometimes. It was like really challenging. You would end up like tampering with some like plugin or something, and then it would suddenly like have its own like maintenance like
Yeah,
path. And then
yeah,
you
yeah.
multiply that by like 100 or like 200, and then like yeah, you're in for a world of pain.
A world of hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw the post on the Winchester House,
Mm-hmm.
the Monolith Mansion, which I thought was a great.
It's a good
It was
analogy.
it was yeah, it's a very clever phrasing and a very clever use of the how it started and how it's going meme as well.
I love memes, and if there's like a good template to kind of latch onto, like
It was perfect, yeah. And when it comes to headless, right? Like, how does a merchant determine if they're a good fit for it, right? How do you weigh those trade-offs of having to? Because the point of the post was you're going to start with this thing, then you're going to add 15 different plugins, and then you're not, or you're not going to use 80% of the features that platform gives you that you paid for because you thought you might need them, and then you're going to need a replatform. So, like, how does a merchant kind of weigh all those trade-offs, right? Headless, you get simplicity, probably faster, more custom,
Hmm.
things like that, but you have to roll a lot of your own functionality. So how do you think about that decision in weighing trade-offs?
I guess I'm a big believer in sort of right tool for the job. So like a Magento or a Shopify is going to be good for certain types of businesses. And then if you think about sort of what they're kind of good for, is very sort of, I guess, I kind of call them like cookie cutters. Like this, the business is very sort of standardized, very sort of simplistic in some ways. And as soon as you sort of begin to deviate from that sort of tried and true sort of standard like grid based website, and you kind of start to go towards more either experiential type things, or if there's sort of any sort of complexity in the business model, they're good sort of telltale signs from where maybe headless is a good fit, because you do take sort of all these headless APIs off the shelf, and then you sort of wrapper them with some like logic to kind of like get it all to work together. And in that sort of lightweight wrapper, you can sort of tailor it to your like business model. Perhaps there is also, I guess, an element of technical competency on the team that is sort of implementing and selecting the technology. So if it's like a mom and pop, like just starting out, like headless is probably not a good fit. Like maybe 3-4 years from now, like when headless is sort of just a behind the scenes type thing, where everyone is sort of powered with Jamstack and stuff, it becomes kind of a mute point. But like right now, I would sort of recommend like BigCommerce or Shopify or Webflow, or something that's more visual that someone can
Hmm.
just kind of get up and running.
Right.
Whereas I guess sort of when you get into the mid market and especially the enterprise, like that's where sort of headless and that's really starts to sort of you benefit from moving that way.
Right. Would you
But
say that, so like, would you say that almost across the board then, because mid market is like this market that like Magento, like I sort of come from the Magento world, and Magento is all about the mid market, and Shopify Plus is attacking the mid market as well. The mid market is this kind of interesting, valuable, amorphous space that
mhm,
people are trying to serve, right? So the mom and pop, no technical, no in-house technical team, like, forget about headless, right? If you are
mhm.
mid-market, whatever the hell that means, is it fair to say that most of the time headless could be the right tool for the job for you? Or, how should, if I'm a mid-market wholesaler, retailer, distributor, whatever, how would you think about that decision for them?
I guess it depends on what you're trying to kind of solve for as well. So you can kind of do like a hybrid approach where you maybe take Shopify and then you do like headless like storefront on in front of that, and then you'll
Mhm.
get all the like the speed benefits for the website loading fast. In the same breath, you may end up throwing out a lot of what makes Shopify great because you're kind of making the trade off. And so you end up losing some of the plugins and nice out of the box features and functionality.
Mhm.
So that's kind of one sort of approach I would say sort of does work. Um, but yeah, for in terms of sort of trying to identify is headless right for me, um, it really comes down to I guess like business model, what you're trying to achieve, the channels that you're selling through. Obviously, is a big one. Like if it's just a website, maybe Shopify is okay. If you're trying to do some more like IoT voice type thing or in-store experience that isn't a standard point of sale, like
Mhm.
those types of experiences, like sort of on the edge, they're quite
Mhm.
sort of useful and powerful. Maybe it's. I also look at it as I guess sort of if you look at like the Shopify checkout, it's quite a standard process. If you have any sort of customization inside of that checkout, that's a telltale sign. So if you're having, say, like in the US, for example, if you're selling like firearms or like marijuana or like CBD, like medical companies, that kind of thing, where you're adding verification steps to verify someone's identity or something, like
Mhm.
or maybe you have multiple participants in a checkout. It's not just the seller and the buyer. Maybe there's some sort of assistance throughout that checkout process.
Mhm.
Maybe you're selling some like customized products that requires someone to like measure or like input variables alongside you.
Custom name
Uh,
engraving on a mug or something like
yeah,
that.
sort of. I sort of like boil it down to like there's an axis that people sort of exist on, and sort of the platforms are applied to that axis of like on one end you have speed, and that's like Shopify, like go really fast, and the other end is control, and that's sort of like control like everything about the technology and how that applies to your business requirements,
Mhm.
and you choose one or the other. Magento obviously exists more towards the control angle. There's like DIY on the far extreme where you control everything, but it's going
Yeah.
to cost you. Headless is probably somewhere like similar to Magento in terms of maybe a bit more in terms of having to assemble things to yourself.
Right.
Um, so yeah.
It's a complicated decision, I think, at the end of the day. Like when you talk about like you mentioned, having, sort of a light logic wrapper on top of some of these APIs to tie things together. How would you compare? I recently found out about Commerce Tools. I didn't really know anything about it. It's like massive. I mean, the customers that they have are humongous.
Hmm.
And I was looking at some of their API coverage, and they're obviously like Shopify is a cool API and stuff like that, but it seems like Commerce Tools, well, they're API first, and so I'm curious. Have you dug into the differences between those APIs, like for specific projects, and like how would you compare them?
Yeah, so I guess I'd sort of caveat this with we competed against Commerce Tools at Molten in sort of mid 2019 and
Right,
moved away from sort of developer go to market more towards the enterprise, which is I guess where there's more sort of product market fit for Headless, at least right now in terms of the
right,
maturity of the technology.
right,
Um, so I guess like there are differences in that, like I guess the Shopify APIs were sort of designed for plugins for the wider ecosystem to tap into,
right.
as opposed to sort of being API first, where you
As
build the
opposed to the
APIs and
front
then
ends. Yeah.
whatever the experience is sort of built on top. And it's not just the front end is one part of it. The other side of the API is obviously the back office and the integrations and the data flowing from various different systems. So, um, like for example, like Commerce Tools, you use it for like cart and checkout. Maybe you integrate a PIM, for example. Maybe you already have a PIM. You've got more complex needs as a larger company. You're maybe managing hundreds of thousands of products, and that maybe Shopify is not going to scale to that point where you have that large of a catalog. So, like, I would say it's not just Commerce Tools. When you look at sort of a headless implementation, you're going to end up with some sort of storefront, and you're going to probably end up with a search provider like Algolia or Constructor, and you're going to have headless CMS perhaps in there as well. So you end up with sort of a consortium of providers to create the whole solution. Commerce Tools is just one, I guess, one important part of that, but there are other
Hmm.
sort of things that kind of create a rounded solution. That's
Right,
one of the, I guess, the challenges of Headless is sort of orchestrating all of those things together.
right,
But in terms of, I guess, how you do that, you don't have like Shopify has plugins and you have like the liquid templating engine, so you learn those proprietary ways of doing things. Whereas with Commerce Tools and with any headless, like pure headless API first product, you sort of bring your own tool belt. So instead of
right,
like learning a framework or getting certified in something, you just bring like Node.js developers or whatever the programming language of choice is. You just
right,
bring that in, and then you just
right,
maybe you're writing some serverless functions. Maybe you're doing some JavaScript on the front end. It's like
right,
very lightweight. You can do like a lot in like 50 lines of code.
right, right, right. What are some of the limits on what are some of the limitations of Shopify as you're scaling in the mid market? Like you mentioned, if your catalog is too big, like you said
Mhm.
something like tens of thousands of products. I was a little surprised that that would be hard for, but I don't know Shopify Plus very well, but I'm trying sort of starting to
I
understand a little
guess
better.
I guess it depends on. So it's partly to do with the UI. So there are UI limitations, but it's sort of if you compare like a PIM tool and you look at like maybe it's Salsify or PIMCO or something, like they've got dedicated interfaces where your merchandising team is basically in there
Right,
building out the catalog and maybe bulk importing things, and there's like a lot of control inside of that.
right.
Um, Shopify can do it, but it's
Like
just I
Shopify
guess
is not a PIM for sure. Like so,
mhm. It's
yeah.
how many operations you can sort of run sort of per second as well if you're trying to bulk update things. Like yes, you could generate multiple API keys inside of Shopify, but then you're kind of like working around the APIs rather than working with them. So
Right,
it ends up creating
right,
a lot more overhead like, to actually
right,
get stuff done.
right,
Um,
right.
so
Yeah,
there's
that's
part of it
where
in sort of the setup, I guess, like the
uh
tediousness.
yeah, yeah. It's like the devil's in the details on all these things. Like until
Hmm.
you've really adopted, your stack for your, especially if you're a decent sized organization and you've rolled it out to your B2B sales reps and your customer service team and your catalog management, you don't know what all those issues are that you're going to hit until you've kind of run into them, you know?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of one of the like even like I kind of came across that in my agency days. Like that would be like one of the big sort of bottlenecks to getting a project like to the next stage of development. Even in sort of headless world, that is still a bottleneck, but at least it's more transparent up front. Like you're having to solutionize sort of as you go into it. How are these things going to come together? And maybe that's
Hmm.
not obvious initially, but it becomes apparent really really quickly
Hmm.
that you have these
Hmm.
systems that they have to talk to each other, and then you kind of get into sort of each role within the organization sort of mapping to a tool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where do they live in their day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Because maybe they don't even know that commerce tools or like for Molten or whatever exists. Like we had some customers that just lived in a PIM and an order management system, and like the cart and the checkout and the front end website was like they didn't need to even know about it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's for when you're used to thinking in terms of a monolithic architecture. It's like it's just a different way of thinking about the website and all the interfaces to it that everyone's going to have. I had a buddy that was saying like there's no such thing as headless. It's you have one head or you have a whole lot of heads. Yeah, right.
It's a terrible term. Like I don't know who came up with it.
I don't know why it's so
Come up with a
sticky.
better
It,
one.
it somehow is it's a sticky term that for some reason that people like.
You could
But
have like Cyclops for the monolith, like Hydra for
yeah,
like what is headless or something.
yeah,
Some sort of
exactly.
mythical creatures or something instead.
Yeah. How did Molten compare to, or how does Molten compare to Commerce Tools? I know you mentioned that you compete against them.
So I guess early on, well, there are internal differences. So Commerce Tools is largely based on Java, whereas Molten version 1 was PHP. We did move on into V2, and we sort of kind of threw away PHP as kind of the requirement, and
Oh,
it
so
became a
sad.
consortium of microservices
Right,
internally.
right.
We had Go, we had Node, Ruby. Like we did have a
Do
bit
you
of
like
PHP for
Go? Do
some
you
of the
love Go?
services.
Or did you? I don't know if you'd used Go, but everybody I know that
I
touches
kind of
Go is just like instantly in love with it.
I kind of like each. I don't sort of love or hate any programming language. I kind of like them all for their quirks
Best
and
tool for the
what they're good
job.
at.
Yeah,
So yeah, sort
yeah,
of again sort of the same repeating thing from
yeah,
just from the like a platform vendor perspective all the way through to like languages. It's like whichever one works best. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of moved from like monolithic PHP like service that we had for our APIs to more microservices on the back end. It
yeah,
wasn't just because obviously Ragdoll for the job and for scaling reasons and things, but also like going to a microservice architecture internally, like we would think about how the platform was consumed externally as microservices. So there's a little bit of that inside of there. If you look at sort of how Commerce Tools APIs are composed versus what was Molten, I can't really speak to kind of what is happening to the Molten product now post acquisition, but what it was at least I can kind of speak to kind of last year, sort of the differences and the similarities. I would also say we cared sort of very heavily at Molten, and we spent quite a long time in the sort of trying to understand and sort of put together a good developer experience. Like we paid a lot of attention to sort of the level of abstraction in the APIs, the level of cleanliness. So we every time we had like a developer kind of compare Molten versus Commerce Tools, it was very much like the developer would be like, yes, let's use Molten because like I'm lazy and I can just pick this one up and it's like really easy. Whereas if you look at the Commerce Tools docs, it's going to take a little bit more time to kind of
gotcha.
get through things. But they do have, on the other side of that, they have more granularity, more control. Like especially at the enterprise level, that's really important where you have like all these like tiny little like levers that you can pull and these tiny
Right,
sort of API
right,
requests that you can make to do very
right,
tiny specific things.
right,
Whereas we would just sort of do it at a more abstract level. So
right.
kind of pros and cons for both. They're both sort of very sort of similar
Yeah,
from
yeah.
there though.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In the consulting that you do now, it seems like you have a pretty good, like I want to talk about the quadrant that you came up
Mm-hmm.
with, which I think is hilarious and insightful. But it seems like you have a pretty good grasp on a lot of different platforms. A lot of people end up specializing, right? They're a Magento
Mm-hmm.
guy, they're a Shopify person, da, 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 da. And it's kind of like the whole e-commerce consulting world is becoming more multi-platform and learning to, I guess there's a
In some
laziness
way, in
to,
some ways, they have to diversify. Like I'm speaking to a lot of like agencies that,
yeah,
and even plugins that run like maybe Shopify will become sort of diversifying across to other
yes,
platforms.
Yes.
um,
That's one
as
of the
well.
things is people are having to diversify for one reason or another. And it's kind of being forced on, like I know a lot of people in the Magento community that they're like back in the day when all you did was Magento, it was simple because you just all
Like
did one
we're a
thing.
Magento agency. That's what we do. Like we build
Yeah.
our whole business on
Yeah.
that.
Build your whole business on it. You got a ton of work. Everybody's
Mm.
happy. There's issues, but whatever. But so, do you specialize in certain, obviously, there's certain platforms maybe better than others, or are you pretty well rounded as far as you can let a merchant know what
I
makes the
guess
most sense for them?
I guess like for the big players, like I'm kind of aware enough of them. Obviously, like 7 years in the space, kind of competing against them at various points. Um, with Molten, our sort of go-to-market was very noisy. Like we just attracted generic developers for 6 years, so you're competing against every commerce platform. So you kind of get to know
Gotcha.
them at least a little bit. Like maybe not as deeply as someone specializing, but enough to kind of be dangerous. To, like kind of pick out their weaknesses and strengths. And
That makes
even
sense.
then, like if someone made like if someone like was a good fit for Shopify and a terrible fit for Molten, we would say that like it would be a waste of our time and theirs to kind of go down the path only for them to kind of get annoyed and angry, and likewise for us, we would like waste a lot of energy. You know,
Right.
like, just sort of trial by fire, sort of learn our way through that sort of process. But
Right.
there's a lot of nuance in the space, but you kind of do get a good sense quite quickly, like within like 2-3 minutes, for like if you speak to like a retailer or brand, sort of where they are on the spectrum of like technical competency. Are they using technology as an advantage, or are they just using it to kind of get by? And then you can start to place them. How big is the budget? How big is the team? Like, are they already using some like headless providers, or are they using monoliths? That kind of thing. Where do
Mm.
they exist? Are they innovative, or are they sort of like laggards in the sense of like when they pick up
Hmm.
technologies? Like, are they like, if you look at the enterprise space, are they still on like Oracle ATG or IBM WebSphere or something? If they're like on that, maybe they're beginning to consider moving away. Maybe they're just gonna live on like 20-year-old technology forever. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
but
you know,
all these variables kind of play into that.
Yeah, this kind of ties into your post on Martech's law,
Mm.
which is that technology changes exponentially while organizations change logarithmically. So there's this huge gap between what's possible technically and where the organization is at. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this huge kind of gap in execution. And it makes me like as I'm looking at that, and you kind of had a cool variation on that chart where you basically overlaid kind of web specific, e-commerce specific points along the thing.
Yeah, the
Um,
problems that kind of
the
drive the
problems
change.
that drive the change.
Or vice
And
versa, like if you have like a solution before its time, like maybe
yeah,
Molten was too early to the market and like people didn't get the problems, but they
yeah,
became more apparent like relatively over
yeah,
time.
yeah. I'm saying
Um,
you were early. You were ahead. You were you were in headless before it was cool. Um, but like as I'm looking at that thing and I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking to myself, so is the solution basically just more startups? Because as the organizations age, they do this logarithmic curve. They get sort of stale and they sort of are stuck in their ways. And I'm thinking, okay, so what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is a startup because it's new. So it starts at whatever point of that tech curve, right? It starts sort of at the
mhm.
top.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
start with a
we
nice
saw that. Yeah,
fresh tech stack,
definitely.
right?
Yeah,
And like,
but the new direct to consumer brands, some of those like they've been burnt by Shopify or Magento or whatever in the past, and they're kind of starting further up the curve
right.
for one reason or another. And that's great. Obviously, they're trying to maintain the velocity and technology changes. And again, it reminds me. I don't know if you saw like the text sort of alongside sort of the Amazon sort of Jeff Bezos mentality, which is like every day is day one or day zero or whatever it is, and you have to constantly be reinventing yourself to kind of not have that like flattening curve, like
Yeah.
organizational change. You're trying to kind of keep pace with what's happening
Yeah.
with the technology changes. So.
Right. And what do you tell a company that, let's say a retailer that has, I don't know, 50 or 100 people, something like that, they've been in business for a while, and you show them this curve, or you're talking about technology decisions related to the curve, like what do you tell them?
I guess the curve is relatively new. Like something I've only sort of had it published like a couple of weeks. Before that, I didn't have a visualization So it was more,
So this is a good
I
tool.
guess,
It's a tool that
it's a,
helps you to
probably a
have the
good tool to kind of
conversations.
put it in front of their face, and it's like it's not just me. It's like it's Martech law. It's like a thing. Like you can go to like a whole website and like learn about it if you want. Like
It's
it's
a
not,
law.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
not just Adam's like echo chamber or something. This is like a wider. It's wider than it's
right.
bigger than e-commerce. It's like
Yeah.
software technology as a whole. Um, but yeah, at Molten, we would sort of try to, I guess, piece together kind of where they're at in terms of like how quickly can they move, how agile are they as a team, like to make decisions and actually implement them. And then sort of again, sort of, it's very easy to like measure website performance. Like you can go in and you can like load up the page speed in Google Lighthouse and see how quickly something's loading or not. There's also, that's kind of a hard number. There's also qualitatively you can sort of look as well, sort of visually how quick is a page. That's sort of, that's what Google measures like right now. Like I'm looking forward to when Google is measuring cart and checkout like speeds as well. Like it seems like the performance metrics get you so far and then they kind of stop. Like I wanted, like when
Right.
I go to a Shopify checkout, it's like slow, and I'm like, why is it so slow? Like it shouldn't take like 3 seconds to load like a checkout page for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So like
Are
that's
you
kind of
a
like,
are you a fan of
go ahead.
fast? The fast
Yes,
checkout? Yeah.
I'm definitely a fan of fast. I see it as sort of a spectrum. So like I've obviously had a lot of time to think since the acquisition. So um, that's sort of helped me sort of, I've got like a spectrum of like platforms as well, from like a platform to a service, and then there's add-ons and widgets versus like a full like blown like feature set. Um, so yeah, there's like there exists a spectrum as well in terms of like e-commerce like providers,
Hmm.
and there are things that don't exist yet as well. I would say I don't know that I have the energy to build them, but sort of from the experience of sort of why people chose Molten, like it, they maybe thought they were choosing an e-commerce platform and then realized like later on that it was a cart and checkout service that they were buying, and they were doing a lot of stuff in code to customize around it. So you can, in my head, it was like Fast and Bolt are very like streamlined like self checkouts for that 80% of the use cases, where they're very standardized. I would say people chose Molten for the other 20%, and that's probably the reason why they choose Magento as well in terms of that customization.
Hmm.
And right now that's in code, and I think that that's going to become like the barrier to entry is going to become a lot less as we see sort of no code and low code interfaces applied on top to kind of get, because we would see that sort of the same process. Sometimes headless implementation would take 2 weeks and they kind of go live like super quickly from scratch, from like nothing. Other times it takes 6 months, and a lot of that like is taken up by integrations that could be out of the box, like in terms of just turning things on, like they're very so standardized. It would be the last like 10, 15, 20% would be the customization part. So there's 80% of the work that can be done like very quickly. It just needs to
Hmm.
be productized and have an interface put on top of it, and then you can just
Hmm.
like click a few buttons.
Yeah.
Um,
That
that's
makes a
what's
lot.
sort of missing right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, you're a little off center if you go a little more center in
Okay.
the video. Yeah, thanks. But it's funny because like one of those trade-offs with headless is how you're giving yourself more work, right? Maybe you got to create a custom front end or whatever, but it's kind of like the picture you're painting is more one of low code kind of orchestration of a lot of different things. So you can create something very unique at kind of best of all worlds without having to reinvent the whole wheel 7 times over.
It kind of brings you back around to that point you made about like all these like startups like in on the vendor on the retailer and brand side. It's the same thing for the software side, and it feels like there's going to be like something that comes along and ties everything back together again. So instead of having like a commerce like suite or platform, you end up like a commerce stack. Basically, it's
Hmm.
a nuance. Maybe they end up being acquired and someone swallows everyone up. Like that
Yeah.
might happen, and if it happens, you may end up losing some of that flexibility that made the stack great, and you end up with the
Yeah.
suite again, like very rigid thing. But
I
I
actually,
really like that sort of ecosystem approach.
yeah. I actually created this website, commercestack.io. I think it's been like 6 months, but it was basically the idea was for merchants. It's like built with sort of, but
Mhm.
specific to e-commerce where people can share what their kind of commerce stack is in terms of whatever plugins, platforms, things they use. And then like agencies also to be able to show which parts, pieces of the stack they're.
Is it like visual? Do you have like diagrams that get generated out of the back of that, or
There's no diagrams, nothing near the level
that's
of
how
the
we sold
diagram.
Headless? Like like that's how we built Headless. It was literally like people can't see it, so you have to draw a picture, and like you
That makes
abstract
sense.
away like some of the integrations and the
Right.
APIs, but you just have like all the logos on a page.
Right. That's basically what it
Uh,
was. It was it's
not
just
much really.
yeah, it's just logos. Um, and I like the content you're putting out, like with the Commerce Magic Roundabout, and also like
Mhm.
the Martech's Law. Like I like how you're putting out, you know, everybody's doing different types of content, and I like what you're doing because it's like it's not just it's like you are like tying things into, you know, like the laws, or tying into the quadrant, like you're doing stuff that's a little deeper, right, than just, you know, some conversion rate chart that's going up and to the right or something
Yeah,
like
a
that, you know.
conversion rate or like just like a feature comparison or like
Yeah,
that's just like kind of
exactly.
like it's like stale. It's like that's not
Yeah.
like people get sucked into like feature comparisons and all this like optimization stuff,
Feature
and it's like
comparisons are hilarious, right? Because
mhm,
they're always they're almost always comically biased in favor of the
mhm,
company creating it, you know? It's like it's just funny, you know?
yeah.
Um,
I remember we did one of those once and then like we got it wrong and we're like, okay, like let's just take it down. Like it's like we're fighting a losing battle. There's like we've got 10 engineers against like hundreds. So
right. What do you mean you got it wrong?
like I think it was like we were comparing various like e-commerce like widgets or something, and then like we got called out. It was like, okay.
Oh,
you
gotcha,
can't
gotcha, gotcha.
you can't know everything to like that level of like detail. So
Right, right. So the Commerce Magic Roundabout looks super interesting, kind of hilarious. I've started to see with the Magic Quadrant that the platforms that are winning in the Magic Quadrant are like a negative indicator now to me. It's like,
I mean, like
uh,
I don't know if you read the post, the kind of that was like linked to that, but it kind of talks about how some of the vendors kind of are like past their prime. Like it's like yes, they're leaders in terms of market share, perhaps, but in terms of sort of product vision and execution capabilities, like their
yeah,
team has sort of waned. Maybe they've left and like gone elsewhere, or like they're just like kind of yeah, they kind of it's like again the organizational like chart kind of comes into play a little bit. They become very difficult. They're like giant like tankers, like old tankers that don't
yeah,
like. It's very difficult to steer one once it's got to that sort of scale. So
yes,
how do you kind of make that change and like
yes,
stay relevant? Like you see, like I looked at like Magento like over the past like 3, 4, 5 years. I'm just like looking at the technology decisions that they're making, and then they can kind of get stuck with them. Like
yeah.
even when like knockout JS and that kind of thing, it's like why are they using these things still?
It's
It's like
like a curse. It's like they do the
mhm,
best they can, and they're like cursed to pick the exact. You know, it was prototype JS for M1, and now it's
mhm.
knockout, and it's like they're always picking the wrong thing.
Yeah,
The
you kind of place the bet, and then if you're wrong, like you kind of screwed
Yeah,
yourself. So
right. And then it's
um,
also a speed thing too, because like you can place a bet and then hope that you're right in 4 years, or you can just iterate faster than that. Like, and that, which is probably kind of the way to go. The crevice or crevasse of carelessness, I thought was some good copywriting,
I had some
and
good creative names for those
yeah,
sections.
it was good, and it did sting a little bit, as somebody that's been, you know, deep in the Magento ecosystem, but I it feels true. Like it feels, I
Mhm.
have to say that it feels true. What would your advice be to the Magento team if you could give them some advice?
Oh, that's
See,
tough
it's
question.
hard. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
harder when you flip it around and you go,
I've got a very simple one. Like it's like maybe it's terrible. Magento version 3. Like there you go. Just put it all in the bin and just start again with a small like skunkworks team. You don't need like hundreds of developers. You need 10 to 20 people, and just like go fully into like headless, like microservices, API first. Just go there as
just
quickly as you
get like your
can.
10 top people and just start fresh.
Yeah,
Is that
like completely separate, just separate. Because if you kind of get sucked into sort of the existing like team and like business processes and structures that are in place and the org charts and everything else, like you're not going to get anywhere fast enough. Like
You
the
know, that's
commerce tools is going to
interesting.
like they get like nibbled away from everywhere, and like who's gonna
Yeah.
like it's like death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because that ties back into that Martech's law graph and the conclusion being startups. Like
Like,
basically, you just
like
said,
we had like an internal monolith, like we had to scrap it and start again. It was painful. It was
right,
hard, even for
right,
us to go from like version 2. Like
right,
it was like, but in some ways,
right,
it was like a good thing at the end. We got
right,
acquired because of that decision. But
right,
yeah,
right. That's interesting. Yeah, and on the other hand, it's like the hard thing about hard things, is like a company that has hundreds of people or thousands of people for them to make, like, it's easier to make that change, scrap it and rewrite it when you're a smaller team. And not that it's easy, it's still hard. But it's like several orders of magnitude harder when you're a bigger company. At the end of the day, the
yeah.
market doesn't care. Like the market doesn't care that it's hard for you to make a shift. The market is going to go with whatever the best product is. And so it kind of doesn't matter that it's hard, but at the same time, like if you're in that position, like what do you do? It's a hard thing
You
to
got
do.
a few. You kind of got a few years to kind of fix it and a few years to catch up, and by that point, you're kind of sliding to
Right,
stagnation. So like I've got like a blog post title in my head. I haven't like figured out what it's gonna say yet, but it's like Adobe's like $1 billion mistake. Like yes, they've acquired Magento for the customer base and like the branding and like getting a platform and stuff, and like to like pull it into the Adobe suite. But like, where do you go from there? Like the product is like stale at this point. They're like kind of chipping away at it and stuff. But like,
yeah,
man,
yeah,
like
I hear you.
if I was like a chief product officer or like some sort of product manager over there, I'd be like pulling my hair out. Like what? Like
Yeah.
what do I do with this?
It'd be like, let's redo it. Let's burn it down.
Mhm.
Why is I think I might know the answer to this now that based on some of the things we've discussed, but I noticed that Commerce Tools was higher on the vision axis than Shopify, and I'm curious why that is. If it's just because they're going the headless direction, and Shopify is
I mean,
kind
I
of
mean,
tacking headless
I
on
mean,
as an
yeah,
afterthought.
Shopify are kind of tacking it on. I think it is to do with API first and sort of headless and the microservices aspect. The fact, if you think about for Shopify, like their whole premise is a platform that is easy, turnkey, and easy to pick up and use,
Right,
and it's monolithic in nature. And they're quite, if you look at sort of how their approach is with the ecosystem, it's quite controlling. Whereas Commerce Tools is a little bit more sort of hands off, and it's like up to you, the implementer, to kind of figure out the gaps and fill things in. Whereas sort of I'm very hesitant around the Shopify ecosystem and kind of what they do with their like their other vendors and integrators, like because they have all the data, they know what's working, like what isn't working, they can go and replicate a feature or like a specific vertical thing and improve upon it, and then they
right,
just squash, kill, like
right.
and obviously it's tied into that checkout as well. Like the checkout is very locked down, like you can't do very much inside the checkout because
Well,
that
but
is
they just released those APIs for the checkout, right? Just like a week
yeah,
or two ago.
exactly. Yeah, but
So
it's
that'll
kind
be
of
interesting.
things have to get kind of routed through the Shopify checkout.
Yeah.
Whereas like it was very interesting, like Molten, you didn't have to use a checkout if you if you didn't want to. You could kind of just like pick and choose and kind of like
But
circumvent it.
the thing is like a checkout is like you don't want to be in like that's the problem they solved that Magento was causing is like you don't want to host your own checkout. Like that's a
Mm.
tough thing to do. And it's going to go
I mean,
down.
yeah, it depends. Like if you're in the 80% of like retailers and brands that just need a standard checkout, like
Yeah.
sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's for the B2B use cases and all the complex stuff that you
Yeah.
might need to host. Like you couldn't plug in Fast or Bolt or something. Like you're gonna end up that you need to have the extra steps.
I was curious about that. Like I don't know too much about Fast either, but so you use Fast on top of Shopify or that's just not possible.
So you can use it on BigCommerce right now, from what I'm aware of. They've got a plugin. I've had a conversation with them briefly. They do have some APIs sort of behind the scenes. I don't think, like since I last checked, they haven't put out the documentation for that. But ideally, then once you've got the APIs out, you can do sort of integration with anything, which is great. I assume you at that point you'll be able to use like commerce tools and whatever else. You can kind of just plug them in. I think Shopify they've got an issue with, from what I've seen on like Twitter, where they're kind of like their founders are saying like let us have access to the Shopify checkout so we can add our button. Because yeah, it's kind of a bit locked
S-
down. So,
Gotcha. So that's one of
but
those kind of
it'd be
control issues where Shopify wants to have a certain amount of control and over the ecosystem and stuff. Does
mm.
so does Commerce Tools not like, do they not step on? Because to a certain extent, platforms are going to always cannibalize their ecosystem.
Hmm.
There's kind of no way around that, right? Because a platform has to grow, the feature set has to grow. And
Hmm.
anytime a feature set is, I mean, not that it necessarily has to, but it seems to always grow. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and so you're going to step on something if your feature set is growing. And the things you're going to want to step on are going to be the things that are the most popular. That's where you're going to probably want to focus.
Um, yeah, I could see. I guess it depends on how those features kind of come about and get integrated. So I can see commerce tools acquiring other API companies. That would make sense. And that would still retain the flexibility of like being able to pick and choose which features you actually decide to implement versus go somewhere else and get a better product for, perhaps. So I kind of see it sort of as sort of how it gets integrated. Is it kind of pulled in to the core, and it
Yeah.
kind of becomes quite rigid and kind of in some ways mediocre, because eventually, like, if you we saw this at Molten, if you go really broad, like you don't specialize, like you just end up with like a bad product like in every category. And then we ended up sort of pivoting away from being a platform and focusing on cart and checkout, which is what our customers were kind of using us for.
Gotcha.
um, Even if they didn't realize it, that's what they that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like people had like assumptions that like we even saw it like in our like onboarding, like we had like hundreds and hundreds of developers signing up every week, and then
Oh, wow.
like a small fraction would get through and actually build something. Like
Right.
a lot of them kind of came in expecting like the Shopify experience where it's like all there, and it was like be like
Right.
I sort of imagine like we never really cracked it. Like we were focused on a lot on features and sort of the existing customer base, but like if we just focus a bit more time on the onboarding. I like that, like I said, like the developer experience, like when you go in and click buttons, like the low code stuff. I feel like that was the thing that's missing. You're seeing it a little bit. I'm not sure how familiar you are with like the headless CMS space and like the Jamstack and stuff like
Little
Stack Kit.
bit. I've messed around with like Prismic a little bit, um, and I thought that was really cool. I've messed around with well, not that Webflow is headless; it's the opposite of that. But I've messed around with, as far as like no code stuff goes, I messed around a little bit
Mm-hmm.
with Webflow.
I feel like we're gonna have like a combination of all these things like together, where like it's like the best of all worlds
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
end. But
What are some of
um,
your favorite headless CMSs for e-commerce?
there are, I guess, in my sort of what I kind of my three go tos. So sort of for the developers, the hobby projects on the lower end, there's Contentful. That's huge.
Hmm.
And they've raised like monster rounds of cash, and they're sort of obviously fueling their growth. So that would be sort of the first. And then there's two that are, I guess, more sort of mid market and enterprise: Content Stack and Amplience. I'll caveat that with one of my clients at the moment is Amplience. I'm helping them from a product marketing perspective, but they're sort of heavily invested into. Amplience specializes in sort of e-commerce like use cases. So
Hmm.
they look to they look to partner with commerce tools, for example,
Hmm.
and specialize in the, the e-commerce experiences that kind of get created inside the CMS, as opposed to a more generic offering.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, like
I
I
don't want to
think.
kind of like sell Amplience or anything, but it
All right.
depends. Like they're not a good fit for everybody, I would
I
say.
mean,
But
I think everybody has their biases, So I think it's
mhm. Yeah,
hey,
I don't know if
like it's
there's a book
blurry.
called Positioning by Al Rees. This is a book I've got. I'm putting together like a reading list. That's going to be blurry as well. It's
Yeah, it's
not a
blurry.
face. It's like it's got this like ladder like concept where like a human brain can only have like so many vendors on a specific categorized ladder. So if you think about e-commerce platforms, you have so many vendors on that ladder. The same it applies for any industry. So like what's the biggest drinks company in the world? Like Coca-Cola, and then it's maybe Pepsi and so on. So you get this like ranking thing, and whoever gets the first spot obviously gets a dominant position in the market because it's occupying everyone's brain space.
Hmm.
So you could imagine sort of commerce tools as maybe the first spot for sort of headless and microservices, whereas Shopify has got the first ladder position for sort of mom and pop like
Yeah,
e-commerce platform, for example. It's very difficult to change that perception once it's set as well. So like there are perception issues when I see sort of Shopify trying to go headless, that people kind of have them categorized in a bucket. It's
right,
very hard to kind of move buckets. So you got to fight against that.
right.
Um, but I'm trying to relate this back to like it's sort of that concept where people only have so much vision as to kind of what they see in the market. Like if you look at like headlesscms.org, I think that's netlify whatever. I think they've got like a new sort of directory of all the headless CMSs. There's like 100 or something. It's insane. There's like so many,
Right,
and
right,
they're
right,
all
right,
very similar. And there's a few that sort of stand out, sort of like who were there first, or they're larger,
right.
or they specialize into a specific
Yeah,
niche or vertical.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So there's a lot of options.
yeah, and then there's like the front ends, which is like I'm trying to sort of figure out the front ends more. So you've got like Frontastic and Vue Storefront. Mobify just got acquired by Salesforce, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the front end world, and then you've got hosting like Vercel and Netlify, that sort of make things a lot easier as well. And sort of,
Hmm.
I imagine there'll be sort of I guess like almost like a digital ocean or something for e-commerce eventually, where you can just like click a
Hmm.
few buttons, select your hosting provider, select your promotion engine,
Right,
select your cart, and you just
right,
click deploy, and it just like launches a site, and then you
right,
could like just hammer it, or you could have it, you program it as a script and like spawn 10,000 websites at a keystroke, and it would just
right,
like suck data in from a feed.
right,
That's at that point, that's like
right,
superpowers
right.
for
Did you
whoever's like
say
at the control panel.
frontastic? Was
Fantastic.
what
There's
is
a
that?
few.
It's a cool name.
So
What do they do?
they're a headless front end for like, e-commerce platforms and CMSs. So like instead of like building like something on the Jamstack yourself, you can pay them as a subscription fee, and they'll do your storefront for you.
Oh, okay,
So it's
gotcha,
kind of like so instead of building everything yourself, you can kind of go to one of these front end providers, and they kind of solve that problem.
gotcha.
So each headless vendor will have their own like examples and accelerators and things, and then there's like these things that you could use in production. And then some people just even then they still go and build their own. They just look at these things as like references, and then
Hmm.
decide we'll get two developers and we'll go build a
Right,
front
right,
end
right, right,
in our
right,
stack.
right,
But
right,
there's a lot of choice, which
right,
also makes it difficult.
right,
And
right.
that's what I'm trying to sort of. I'm working we haven't really talked about kind of what I'm doing sort of post acquisition, but I'm a consultant now, and I'm kind of working both for the vendors themselves for product marketing, sort of helping them sort of with their sales and marketing processes, but also for the retailers and brands, evaluating vendors and making those technology choices. Because it's really hard. Like even I'm confused sometimes. Like someone will throw like another vendor at me, and I'm like, I've never heard of them. Like give me like an hour. I'm gonna go
Yeah,
deep in it as much as I can to, and then use all the other data points that I've got from like looking at all the other products to kind of get a quick gut feel.
yeah,
And then if you want me to go deeper, I could spend like half a day kind of like doing like really detailed investigation work.
yeah, yeah,
But usually the gut feel is like a good enough like
yeah,
checked.
yeah. I think most people have pretty sort of simplistic heuristics for
Mhm.
use this platform or use that platform. And even if they do consult on a handful of different platforms, like they're a big commerce partner, they're also a Magento partner, Shopify Plus partner, they probably have a few relatively simple buckets that you kind of fall into based on budget or a few different high level features.
It's like yeah, it's a positioning ladder. Like you have to like as a
Right,
human, you have to synthesize all this like chaos
right,
into something that's very simple, because
right,
otherwise, like I don't know how you'd cope. Like
right, right,
the world is over communicated too. There's like a lot of marketing out there and stuff. You kind of have to try and get past that a little bit, just
right,
to get to something that's a little bit tangible and real. And I feel like that's kind of like coming back to that
right.
magic roundabout. That's kind of what I was kind of going for. Is kind of like just getting a little bit more down to like a realistic sort of
Yeah,
level as to, and it's all
yeah.
relative. It's all based on each other, kind of as
It's
well.
all
But
kind of subjective, but I think you mentioned what an acquisition by Salesforce, and I think if I remember from the chart, Salesforce and Magento were in the crevice of carelessness. But if I
mhm.
remember, Salesforce was moving in the right direction, and
Yeah,
Magento
that's
was
why
moving in the
like
wrong.
the acquisition is kind of like
That's the
the
reason why.
direction.
And it
They're
was
kind
at
of
the and what was that
fighting the head.
acquisition again? What was that
So
acquisition
that's
again?
yeah, that's Mobify. That's the headless front end. So
Gotcha.
they've kind of in some ways solved part of the headless problem by acquiring a front end. It doesn't solve the monolith on the back end though. They still have like a terrible CMS and back end suite.
Gotcha.
So like to fix that, they either build like something themselves, API first, microservices, or they go and acquire one.
Yeah.
That's what that to get them at like up more like up near getting to the like horizontal line. Like that's where they kind of need to be.
Right.
I've got like a headless like CMS roundabout as well, but it's like
Okay.
just chaos. It's way more chaotic than
It's
the e-commerce
madness.
platform space.
Uh,
Like it's yeah, it's insane. Like it's harder to create an e-commerce platform than it is to create a CMS. Like CMS is easy. Like there's no logic. It's just like data, like
right.
input and outputs. But a CMS, an e-commerce platform is like cart calculations, promos, tax,
Right.
shipping.
Right. Right. Right.
Like
Right.
there's more complexity there.
But the
So
quadrant is more complicated because there's, I think probably also because the space is newer. So it kind of goes back to that
mhm.
MarTech law, right? Like the e-commerce platforms have all kind of a little bit been set in the path that they're on, whereas like these headless CMSs are probably all relatively newer. Like you said, it's sort of a fundamentally simpler problem to solve. So
But
then the
you sort of you pull in like WordPress into that or Drupal or something, and they kind of like yeah, they're kind of maybe like below a little bit. I don't know if you're aware of the there was a discussion at the Netlify ecom. I think it was Headless Ecom Summit or the Headless Summit, like Jamstack Summit or something in the past like week or two, where the Netlify founder had a debate with the WordPress founder. Like
oh really?
I instigated that. I instigated that on Twitter. I was like tagging them both. I was yes, come on, like we gotta have a discussion about this. And
Oh
like I
really?
think like again, it's sort of like a right tool for the job thing. Like WordPress is good for certain people, and like yes, they're kind of moving towards headless a little bit too, and you can build on that. You can build that stuff, but yeah, I kind of like to just agitate people a little bit and just have the discussions because then more people will become aware of like newer technologies and newer
Yeah.
approaches. And everyone should benefit in the end. So,
Right.
but get your popcorn emojis.
The WordPress CEO's name is escaping me. Matt.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're both called Matt, which like confuses
yeah.
things even more. Like,
What's his last name? Matt. Anyways,
I kind of wanted to jump to
he has a
Twitter, but
pink circle avatar on Twitter, which I remember.
yeah.
But so you instigated that like discussion between them. That's
Like,
interesting.
I think the CEO wrote a letter on like on the blog or something of Netlify, and then the WordPress founder wrote a response, but they weren't talking to each other. So I was like, just tag them both and like just like see if they're gonna have a. And then they started talking about having a debate and stuff, and then that got arranged. And then
Nice.
like I don't know, the chat was crazy. So the Netlify were using I can't remember the name of the tool, but you have a live, just a bit like Twitch, and there's like thousands and thousands of people like watching, all like trolling each other and like fanboys
Uh,
coming out. It was hilarious.
it got wild.
Yeah, and they're like
um,
moderating the chat. Like there must be like dozen moderators around, delete all the like profanity. It was
that's
like
funny.
yeah, people love like technology companies. They kind of become like it's like Apple.
Yeah, and it's also like, people get religious about platforms,
Mhm.
it just happens.
Yeah, I
Like,
just think that's a bit. I think that's just a bit crazy. I'm a big believer in like right tool for the job. Like I was at university, I
right.
was doing like WordPress and stuff, and like yeah, it's good for a certain type of like person or company.
Yeah.
It's not what I would use now, but to
Yeah.
each their own. If it does the job, it's fine.
One of the
Um,
things I think might be interesting is to like have one of the things I keep thinking about is like a podcast with a merchant like and two different consultants that specialize in different platforms and kind of like basically doing a consulting session live on the air and proposing
mhm.
different solutions to solve their problems, right? So it's like, well, we need this, so we need this integration and that, and it's one of those things. It could be just chaos, or
It can be chaos. It can be really dull. It could also be like really
it
interesting.
could be
Like
great,
we would
right?
do the that's what we would do like in the sales process at Molten. We wouldn't just sell Molten. We would be selling like 10 other products alongside us
Yeah,
based on like the problem we're kind of presented with.
right, right.
Um, so
And it's
yeah,
like
you kind of
so
become
many of those discussions, like all of these mid-market enterprise sales workflows are all behind closed doors, and sometimes there's weird incentives and weird stuff going on. And there's something to me that'd be interesting about getting those conversations out into the open. Obviously, there's limitations, like a retailer can't just talk about all the private stuff within their RFP publicly.
mhm.
But I don't know, there's something to me that would be neat about getting those conversations out into the open.
Yeah, you'd have to get that would be the hard thing finding a retailer to like play ball, like want to do it publicly.
Yeah.
Um, but even yeah, even just kind of like as a like for even for a smaller start, like a if you can find like a D2C brand or something that's just starting out or
Like a
something.
cool one that's like really transparent.
There's like a cool one that's been like maybe they've got a little bit of funding or something, and it's like still privately owned and stuff like that would be. one way to go, because you were talking to the decision maker and the person that can maybe has to go and implement it. Maybe I
Hmm.
remember one customer was the CMO and the developer. Like one of our 6-figure deals, it was a D2C brand, and like the deal was like very quick
Uh,
because you could just
the
convince
CMO was the developer. Yeah,
those deals were like the best because like you only have to
yeah,
convince one person. Like
yeah,
you don't have to
yeah,
sit in front of a room of 20 people and try and tell each person how they're going to do their job like six
yeah,
months from now.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah. On a conference call with 20 different people.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I'm not sure if I was reading this part of the chart correctly, but it seems like the arrow vector for big commerce was showing that it was like accelerating faster along the execution axis. Is like the arrow was longer. I don't know if I was misreading that as compared
Yeah,
to
I
like
think
Shopify.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like Shopify is yes moving towards headless, and like I've spoke to a few Shopify Plus agencies that are doing headless implementations, but they are saying the same thing that I'm saying, which is like you're kind of throwing all the stuff that made Shopify great out the window and just doing the headless thing for the site speed. But yeah, for the big commerce side, I think that obviously there's the IPO. I also see their APIs and their marketing in the market a lot. I feel like they're doing a better execution of headless than Shopify is. They've moved faster. So like a few years ago, Shopify and BigCommerce like duking it out in the SMB space, and now I feel like BigCommerce is beating them to the punch a little bit in sort of the headless space. That's sort of
Gotcha.
my read
What
in terms of
like
both adoption. There was some graphs. I can't remember who posted them. I think it's just built with graphs for like Shopify versus BigCommerce in the top like 1,000 websites, and you can yes, Shopify's ahead, but you should see like the growth curve of like BigCommerce in comparison. Like Shopify is kind of like beginning to ease off, whereas like BigCommerce is going up, and like they're good, like probably like only a few
oh,
months away from BigCommerce taking Shopify.
really?
Uh,
That's interesting.
I think that
Eh,
they've got like a massive like war chest of like funding, obviously on the marketing side to kind of
right. Right. Well, they
do
both have
headless.
massive war chests, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's
Um,
just like how they're being applied, and I think Shopify is fighting a perception issue now. Like the challenge of like being bucketed as SMB. Yes,
yeah.
they've got Shopify Plus, and it's gonna work for some people, but like it's just like again, it's like you get into the details on the APIs, and you speak to like maybe a CTO or a technical decision maker of one of these enterprises that's choosing the ecom platform, and like Shopify is a bad word. Like they just don't even want to kind of go near it. They kind of like they've already put it in their positioning bucket, and they're not able to
Yeah.
bother. Like, they
Yeah.
can get it.
That's
Whereas
interesting.
BigCommerce, I don't think it's got that problem. I think like they lost the SMB space a little bit, but now that's given them some like space to create
Interesting.
a new category for themselves,
That's
which they're still a
interesting.
hybrid. They still have sort of the page builders and the Shopify type stuff. And if you go the headless route, you again put it in the bin. But I feel like the BigCommerce APIs are better, and they have a nicer approach to the ecosystem. It feels like they're like not as sort of controlling of the checkout as well. You see that in like the fast like integration, and it's like
Gotcha.
you
Right.
can just like repeat that across sort of all of
Other
their
categories
ecosystem.
and stuff. That's interesting. It's funny because I think I've heard that a handful of times that sort of BigCommerce is better for headless. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't even know why. It's like that positioning thing you're saying. It's just kind of been positioned that way. And so I have that perception. But in terms of the details, I don't even know why that's the case. But that's a good
There are some
example with
details there. Like if you look at the APIs and stuff, it's like super nuanced, and you have to get like just like comparing API responses to kind of see the differences. They do matter. Like the developer experience does matter. Like
Mhm.
um, it's for like a non-technical business decision maker. Like they're not going to have a clue like what that equates to. But like a good developer experience will equate to a faster implementation and a better
Yeah.
end product. Because there's less ways for things to go wrong because it's
Yeah.
been put together
Any
properly.
specific any specific API API calls come to mind where they have a lot more functionality on the BigCommerce side?
I think it's maybe just around the checkout. I don't think there's too much like from a feature to feature thing. Like again, like feature to feature comparisons are like in some ways pointless. Like it comes down to like the nuance. Oh, if a feature's missing, you can go and find something else that kind of fills that gap and maybe actually does it better. So it's
You
not a
know, like one comparison chart I would be interested in seeing would be API coverage of like Shopify, Magento, BigCommerce, commerce tools. Is that something that you could be sort of you could be sort of objective about it, right? Like a marketing feature functionality comparison chart is always going to be biased, but I feel like in terms of API coverage, it's a little more black and white. It's like, okay, on these objects, which methods do you have? Which fields do you have? And just a big ass chart where you could sort of, so if you're building a loyalty points integration and you want to know about the customer object and the product object and the checkout object, you could just see them all right there in front of you. Oh, Shopify doesn't give me, like, I remember there was a time where Shopify wouldn't give you ability to create promo codes over the API. They had to be created manually in the back end. So then the apps would create some workaround where they'd make it easy for you to copy and paste promo
Yeah, yeah.
codes. And then I think they eventually covered that. But those are the specifics. So it's like the devil's in the details, you know?
Yeah, I think there's the, I guess, the functional like requirements, like all these like categories, like the catalog service, the cart service, the checkout, the order, etc. You could have like a blow by blow for each of those. You get into sort of like eventually, yes, every platform will be covered like at that level, but then there's like the bells and whistles below that, which is like
Yeah.
the granularity when you get into like very specific types of functionality and things, which becomes more difficult because that's when things begin to kind of drift and differentiate a little bit between each different platform in
Yeah.
terms of how they execute that feature, perhaps. So it seems like a monumental challenge, which is probably why it hasn't been done.
Yeah.
There is a product, I don't know if you come across it, API to Cart, and they focus on like
Hmm.
integrate syncing of data between platforms, and they have a
Hmm.
chart that kind of looks like that in
Oh,
terms of
okay.
which ones they've integrated with, which
That's
is
cool.
like kind of useful, but it's like again, it's only like the superficial, like high level stuff. Like they've got like the generic like descriptions and yes or nos, but like it's hard because like you could imagine like Commerce Tools has got like 100% coverage because everything is API first. Whereas if
Right.
you look at like Shopify and they've got like a page builder or something, maybe the page builder isn't API first, but everything
Yeah.
else in the product cart checkout maybe is. So there'll
Yeah.
be similarities, and then there'll be like the nuance.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, everybody shoots for 100% coverage. Nobody has 100% coverage unless they have to. Like e-commerce tools, if you literally don't have a head, then you have no choice. You have to be 100% coverage by definition.
yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to try your best. Maybe the marketing team is going to say you have 100%, but you're not going to have 100%
There's also things
because
that you might not even consider that should be an API. Like we had APIs at Molten that we didn't release, but like we wanted to, but it was like hard to figure out how to do it without like breaking our systems. Like we had like a stores API, so you could like programmatically create stores because we had the whole like we wanted to like people to like at the stroke of a key to be able to like launch like thousands of sites, but obviously behind that
right?
you've got to figure out how to scale that. So like we were like we don't want to like break our own like infrastructure like by doing that.
Yeah.
And we had like like kind of factor in like authentication layers and like how did how
Yeah.
there's the entity of a store versus an organization or a user or something.
Right.
So we had like other sort of roadblocks kind of getting that released to be consumable. But our dashboards used those APIs. Like if you actually like inspected like
Hmm.
in the browser, like, you could see those API calls. So you could technically use them. You could actually like they weren't documented, but you could go in there and use them. So like even functionality that's like maybe part of a different like product journey was API first as well, just because like everything was built as an API.
Nice. Nice.
Which Shopify might have as well, but like again, it's sort of how do you externalize those? That could
Right.
be a challenge.
I think we have a show title here. Everything was built as an API. Um, well,
Mm.
this was a fun chat. What any last things you want to point people to, resources, or where people can find out more information about you, find you online? Where's the best place to find you online? That kind of thing.
I guess the best place is LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm most active. Like I didn't used to use LinkedIn, but now I do. Like it seems like a lot of people on there that
Yep.
kind of want to like find out about things compared to like other social networks. I'm on Twitter too, but not as sort of active on there. So that's sort of the first port of call. I kind of try and feature like interesting like posts that I put out there. So Adam Sturrock on LinkedIn. And yeah, like I think that's sort of the best place to find me. There's like one other thing we didn't get to talk about, and I don't know, it's probably like dropped off of my like featured content thing now. There's like the commerce graph, which is again abstract. I'll send you the
Yeah,
article
we could get
afterwards,
that
and
in. We could get that in. I don't have that in front of me. I don't remember it offhand. Sorry about that.
it's like, I don't know if you know like graph theory and like Facebook and social graphs and that
A
kind of
little bit.
thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of like applied the same line of thinking to the commerce like space. So instead of like focusing on features, the value is in the connections between those features, and helps us
Oh, that's interesting.
describe everything basically. It can describe headless, it can describe omnichannel, it can describe like different customer journeys and checkouts and complexities and things. Because it's all like how the data relates to each other. That's the
Right.
commerce platform. How the data flows through a checkout, or on the behind the scenes or on the front
That's
end.
a really interesting idea. Yeah, that is a very interesting idea, because so much of it is you're connecting uh, data from one thing to another, one app to another. You're syncing, you're importing, and there's a lot of value created in those edges, right, between the
Exactly.
nodes of the graph.
Like that's
Um,
kind of why headless, I guess, creates like a solution that is greater than the sum of its parts, because you have kind of a compounding effect where all
mm,
these best in class services are better than a generic like mediocre monolith,
hmm
basically.
hmm But that kind
Yeah.
of like a good CMS, right? Like a good headless CMS. It's both, right? It's the node, like the better the node, like if you have a really good
Hmm.
node for your CMS management that's just easy to use and friendly and beautiful, then your solution is more powerful. And then you want the edge to also be powerful too, so that it can integrate everything everywhere it needs to go. But it feels like it's kind of both, which I guess is the point of a graph. It's both.
Yeah, you got the nodes and you got the connections between the nodes.
Yeah.
People focus on the nodes, and again, it's kind of the feature comparison stuff, but really, it's the
Right.
connections that are powerful too, and where
Right.
value is like really created, like moving stuff from one system to another so that it can be used in a more optimal fashion. Um, but yeah, that's what I would recommend. I think it's on the Elastic Path website now. Commerce Graph blog post. I might do a Redux. I've got like a whole space sort of mapped out in like a grid. It's like a periodic table of like commerce features and things. So like,
Nice.
there's not. I keep like just sort of documenting stuff like in like diagrams, because like otherwise I'll just like rattle around in my head. But hopefully I can like try and like at least post one interesting thing like a week or a month,
Nice,
that
man.
people
I love
find.
Yeah, I love the stuff you're posting, so keep it coming.